Crushed me. Vernon, get that? All right.
Hey guys, thanks so much for tonight.
We're going to give you about as much time as you had there to talk right now.
That's great. I love it.
That was quick. Are you guys ready? Yeah. Thoughts, like the format? Did it feel too quick?
I love the format, and the moderator, I think the best thing about the moderator was that he didn't interject his own opinions. He let us discuss things in a very open way.
Up to this point in the campaign, some pretty intense, commercials going back and forth, whether or not it's your campaign or Kyrsten's campaign, or whether it's the larger committees. What do you think about the tone of the campaign so far, and where do you take it from here? Are you going to ratchet it up? What do you do?
No, I think it's really sort of, disingenuous to say that you can work across aisles, as Ms. Simmons says, but she endorses these untrue negative campaigns, that are just so out of bounds. And so hopefully, the viewers will be able to see through these things. And it's, it's just not the television commercials. The mailers that she sent out knowingly false information, I don't think that's a good thing. I think the voters should be able to discern and choose a candidate based on the truth.
What do you hope the voters discern from both yourself? Well, let's talk about you, and you won't put any words in anybody else's mouth, but what do you want them to know, and what do you feel like maybe they haven't gotten up to this point in order to earn their vote?
Well, I mean, look, that the finger pointing has to stop, that we must send someone to Congress who will work for the American people and who will not be partisan, who will work with Democrats and Republicans. And I have a rich history of doing that. When I was the mayor of Paradise Valley, I worked with Republicans, Democrats, and Independents to bring about meaningful solutions. And I was unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate as an assistant secretary. And that means that every Republican in the Senate voted for me and every Democrat. And I believe that I can take our brand, meaning the American people, that brand of politics, and working and not be concerned about a donkey or an elephant or Republican Party leadership or Democratic Party leadership, and put our government back in the hands of the American people.
Speaking of that, how do you convince people that Arizona will take center stage in what your platform would be in Washington, as far as not so much the generalized things that a lot of times we hear the presidential candidates talk about for the nation, but Arizona specifically? How do you focus on Arizona?
Well, we have to bring jobs back here. We have to get the middle class back to work, and we have a lot of seniors who live here, and we have to uphold our commitment to our seniors and make sure that we take care of Social Security, make sure that they can have Social Security, that promise is still there, to make sure that we put that $716 billion that have been robbed from Medicare back in. And also the children. We have to make sure that we have a great education system. I am a product of public education. My grandmother, she raised me, and she told me, she goes, the only way that we're going to get out of the situation that we are in, because we grew up in a very difficult neighborhood, that the only way that we're going to get out is through education. I'm a product of public education, and you talked about the deception. The commercials that continually run, they say that I'm against education. I wouldn't be standing here but for education. I just don't believe that we should have a bureaucrat 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C. telling us how to educate our kids. That should be up to the parents and the teachers on the local level.
Vernon, you said you don't support the Romney-Ryan budget. What don't you like about that?
Well, the Social Security aspect of it and the Medicare. Now, I do support the parts of it that says that we must reduce the deficit and we must make spending cuts. But the way that Ms. Sinema characterized it was that I supported the entire Romney budget. And so that was false. Now, there are some aspects of Simpson Bowles, there's some aspects of the Ryan budget, the Romney-Ryan budget, but I will not touch or I will not dilute the commitment that we have to our seniors. I'm just not going to do it when it comes to Social Security and Medicare.
Which spending cuts? You mentioned you supported some of the spending cuts. Which ones?
Oh, look, you have to, I think it has to be agency by agency. I've worked in the federal government, and I can tell you firsthand that we have a process that's called use it or lose it. Let's take a look at the Department of Veteran Affairs. They spent $6 million on a conference, okay? That money could have been better spent. But instead of the $6 million, the real budget for conferences for the VA is $110 $1 million. So we need to go through every agency and make sure that we reward agency heads and cabinet secretaries for making cuts. Right now, that is not there.
But how would you specifically reform Medicare or Social Security? I mean, both sides are saying they want to protect seniors. Both sides are saying they will honor commitments to our current seniors. So give us proposals.
Well, look, the first thing that we have to understand is that when Medicare and Social Security, when they were first enacted, the lifespan was not the same. So we have to take a look at and say that people are living longer. And so not this generation that is currently on Social Security or Medicare, but maybe it's going to start a little bit longer. And then
raising the retirement age.
And then
Okay.
the other thing, if Warren Buffett is receiving Medicare and Social Security, there's a problem. And so we have to look at, who is receiving it. And then, but right now, if we
The
don't,
income cap.
yeah, but right now, if we don't do that, the system is broken and it's going to continue to break. But the way that I would approach it, quite frankly, is to sit down with the best minds, actuaries, doctors, people in the medical profession, people in both parties, Republicans and Democrats, and come up with a meaningful solution. I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you that I will sit down when I get to Congress and work.
Vernon, you said that was a lot of fun in there. It went by too fast. Are you going to debate again?
Who knows?
Do you want to?
Who knows?
We'd love you to.
Who knows?
A question about the Romney-Ryan budget.
Who are you with?
State Press, ASU newspaper.
Oh.
Anyway, I'm sorry, my name is Colton Gavin. My question
Colton,
is...
nice to meet you.
Same
I want
here.
to make sure you stay in school, okay?
I'll try. Anyways, the question is concerning Mitt Romney making headlines about his stance on the subsidy to PBS. You just had a debate on a PBS
You know what I
affiliate.
told Mr. Simons?
Oh, what'd you tell
I
him?
said, I grew up watching McNeil Lair. I love Big Bird. I love Barney. And I believe that PBS has a role to play. Actually, my son he enjoyed Barney. I like Big Bird.
It's okay, you can do
But thank you
Matilda
guys so
part, that's
much. I
fine.
appreciate it. Thank you so much, okay? Good job.
There's also another thing called the template, which is also Trapper's videotaping this, so we're just having a discussion about fashion.
This is track.
Hey, guys.
Your turn.
Thank you, Brian.
Hey, guys.
Like I just told your opponent, we're going to give you about as much time here as you have there, which is.
But no, there's no libertarian now.
A bite-sized debate.
You know, there's an opportunity for one tomorrow. When we finish the debate, Vernon mentioned he'd like to do it again, so I'm going to call Bram. I was just going to say we should call Bram, because we're supposed to be on Channel 12 tomorrow. And Vernon wants to do it separately, and I'm suggesting that we maybe put it together and do a little more debate, so I was thinking we should call Bram.
I talked to Bram earlier. He told me that he asked one more time, and Mr. Murray said that he didn't want to put Vernon on the same stage with you.
Well, we should call one more time, because he said right afterwards he wants to do it again.
You were already with John, right? With Hook. Were you guys there at the same time?
Yes, yes.
was it-
Unfortunately, he wasn't willing to debate together
It
at
wasn't
that
like a
time
debate
either.
style. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Channel 3 as well.
Okay, just checking.
Well, I'm just hoping for one more shot. It'd be great.
Speaking of the format and everything, how did you like the opportunity to talk, however short it might have been?
Well, I think the voters deserve an opportunity to hear from the candidates together. So really, what I like doesn't really matter here. What matters is how the voters of Congressional District 9 feel about this. And what we've been hearing for the last 7 weeks is they want a robust opportunity for debates to occur. In the primary election, you guys were there for most of these, we had 12 debates in the primary, some of which were Democrats and Republicans all together. And yet here we are in the general election, and we've only had one evening of less than 30 minutes to discuss and exchange ideas. And I sure wish that we could have some more opportunities, because I think the voters deserve it.
You're going to push hard for that the next couple of weeks.
We're working hard.
Kyrsten, Vernon talked
Hey,
about.
Jeremy.
Hey, Kyrsten, how you doing?
Doing well.
Long time no see.
I know. Been busy. You too, probably.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Vernon was saying he opposes raising keeping those or getting rid of those tax cuts for people who make $250,000
Right.
or more. Obviously, that includes a lot of small businesses who file
Right.
as individuals. I mean, if you get rid of those tax breaks and keep those taxes high, doesn't that put a high burden on small businesses?
You know, I actually talked about this on Channel 10 with John Hook just about a week and a half ago. And there's an easy solution to keep from overburdening middle-class families and small business owners. You create an exemption for folks who are running small businesses through their personal taxes. Unfortunately, Mr. Parker's solution, which is to not ask those folks to pay their fair share, also means that we're giving big tax breaks to billionaires and millionaires. And, you know, as I mentioned on the show tonight, and as I said on Channel 10, that when you do that, you increase the deficit by $1 trillion over the next 10 years. I just don't think our kids or grandkids can afford that. So he's using a sledgehammer in an issue where we need to be using a scalpel to solve the problem.
I found it interesting what Mr. Gamble said a couple of times, which is, I've got a lot of friends who kind of have this attitude, which is Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter, send them to Washington, nothing's going to happen. There's gridlock, there's fighting, and there's such polarization. How do you convince Arizona voters that once I get to Washington, I'll be able to get something done? It's that broad term, get something done, but a lot of people feel like maybe nothing in this political climate, this polarized political climate, can get done.
Well, I think that's a valid concern that folks have. In fact, it's the most common thing that I hear from voters, that they're frustrated with the partisan bickering. But I would just say, you know, take a look at my record. In the last 7 years in the state legislature, sometimes a very highly polarized legislature, I was able to get things done over and over again. In fact, in 2011, when I served in the Arizona Senate, I was one of only 9 Democrats in the state Senate, made of 30 members, right? Russell Pierce was the state Senate president. I still got 8 bills out of that chamber and up to the governor's desk and the Secretary of State's desk, and all of those became law. So even in a really highly polarized, very charged climate, I found that if you take the time to form relationships with other people, even those who are different than yourself, you can break through gridlock and get things done.
Is there a way to deal with the deficit in a way that it won't just be party lines, can't vote with the other side? How do you break through that? Because would you agree that the deficit is at a level, because a lot of people on the other side, Mr. Parker included, would say it's just at a level that it's unsustainable and it has to be addressed, the 16 trillion or whatever it is?
I think all Americans would agree that our deficit is out of control, needs to be addressed. The problem is that some folks on the right will say the only way to solve the problem is to cut spending. And some folks on the left will say the only way to solve the problem is to change revenue. And I say, actually, there's 3 things we have to do, and we have to do them all together, and we have to do them all in moderation. We do need to cut spending. And so one of the things I've proposed is to crack down on waste, fraud, and abuse. You all probably heard this story just 2 weeks ago. The Veteran Affairs Office spent $6 million on a bunch of junkets, fancy junkets. Well, that really made me angry. You know, as you heard me say in the show, I got a brother in the Navy, an older brother who's a veteran, he was in the Marines. My stepdad was in the Army, and my grandpa was in the Army. And to see the VA spending money on junkets instead of veterans care, that really bothers me. So we do need to cut spending, and we need to be targeted and smart about it. But we also need to address revenue, and that's why I propose that we, ask the richest 2% in the country to pay their fair share and help us keep the deficit from getting even larger. $1 trillion in 10 years is a big amount. The third thing we have to do is grow the economy. And the way to do that, I believe, is through using the strategies like I've put forth in my 12-point job plan, where we actually talk about how to get folks back to work and generating economic growth in our community. Vernon believes that the only way to grow our economy, or the best way to grow our economy, is through corporate tax cuts. There's just no evidence to support that. That what we need to do is get people back to work, because those are the folks who spend their money on their mortgage and their kids' tuition and food. And so that's how we have to help grow the economy. So you got to do all 3 together. But in order to get a Congress that will do all 3 of those together, you need folks who are willing to sit down at the table, talk to each other, and compromise.
Can you talk about the reforming Medicare and Social Security question?
Sure.
You want to protect it. Voucherization is the wrong answer, but what is the right answer? What changes do we make?
Well, first I do want to be very clear that Vernon said on Channel 3 earlier this year, and we're happy to send the tape out to you, that one of his favorite parts of the Ryan budget is the portion that relates to entitlements. So that was him directly saying that he liked the idea that the Romney-Ryan budget proposed in terms of Social Security, Medicare, and turning Medicaid into block grants. So it's an area of great disagreement between us. I believe that we cannot privatize Social Security, voucherize Medicare, or do block grants for Medicaid. But there are adjustments we need to make, and I think that it's smart and sensible to sit down and talk about those adjustments. One thing, for instance, on Social Security is simply ask people to pay their fair share into Social Security. Right now, folks who make over about $110,000 a year or so, am I right on that exact number? Yep, I am. Just want to make sure. There's always fact checks. So that folks who make over $110,000 a year no longer pay any additional part of their salary goes to Social Security, and yet they get the benefit. So that doesn't seem very fair. We should all pay our fair share. Another thing to help protect Social Security, and this is an idea that it doesn't come up very often, is Congress should stop stealing the money. Starting back in Lyndon Johnson's tenure, Congress just started taking money out of Social Security Trust Fund. If they stopped doing that, there'd probably be some money left in there for the future. So we need to take action for sensible reforms that shore up the system and protect it and strengthen it, but not dismantle it and leave it to the vagaries of, this private market. If we had privatized Social Security or voucherized Medicare prior to the big bust that happened in late 07 and early 08, my grandma would have lost everything. And as I mentioned on the show, she retired from working at First Cafeteria her whole life. She doesn't have a pension. She doesn't have a 401k. All she has is Social Security and Medicare. And jeopardizing that and putting it on the volatile market, that's no solution at all.
All set?
All right, thanks, guys.
I have a question. Concerning the Affordable Care Act, you mentioned certain aspects of it. You called them stinkers. In your opinion, what would be an example, if you were elected, of something that you would amend?
Can I just ask who you are? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm Colton Gavin. I'm from the State Press.
Oh, you are? Okay, great. So some of the stinkers. Two things I can speak of in particular. I mentioned this briefly on the show. There's not enough done for the corporations that have between 50 and 200 employees. So right now, the way the law goes, and it will go into effect in 2014, if you have less than 50 people in your employment, the law doesn't apply to you. If you have more than 200, it's mandated. But if you're between 50 and 200, it's mandated, but you get some support, some financial subsidy. But it's not sufficient for some of those smaller businesses. So we need to provide more assistance to those businesses. My experience has been that businesses really do want to provide good health care for their employees, but if it's prohibitively expensive, they're not going to do it. So we've got to help them do it. Number two, there's a provision in the law that prohibits physician-owned hospitals from benefiting under the Affordable Care Act. And in Congressional District 9, we have one of the best physician-owned hospitals in the state, and that's the Osteopathic Hospital in Chandler. It's a great facility where folks get really, really good care from talented doctors. And I think that provision that disallows them from growing and benefiting under the Affordable Care Act is unfair. Now, that's an area where I think we can find some bipartisan action to fix that problem, because there are lots of Republicans who support physician-owned hospitals as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry for the inquiry.
Oh, well, it's fine.
I knew everyone